All right, so we are live,
Yay.
and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Stephen Gale. I am the Executive Director of the Afro-Amerindian Research and Cultural Center, nonprofit organization based out of Metro Atlanta, Georgia. And again, we are back for our second day for Dividing Line Symposium, our third annual, this time virtual symposium. And we are joined today by Ms. Kimberly Knight. Kimberly is a native of Raleigh, North Carolina, and has served as an HIV and syphilis disease intervention specialist for UNC Chapel Hill's Institute for Global Health and Infectious Disease. She identifies as Afro-Indigenous, whose father was Eastern Band Cherokee and West African, and her mother was Dutch, African American, and Haudenosaunee. During her undergraduate years, she was a member of Sigma Omicron Epsilon Sorority Incorporated, a Native American women's sorority and East Carolina Native American organization at East Carolina University in 2004. Currently, she's a member of Western Wake Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, a member of the Triangle Native American Society and Junior League of Raleigh, and she has participated in Native American powwows as a jingle dancer and volunteered at East Carolina University's annual powwows. Currently, she is the committee chair and advisory council for the first Black Indians powwow for the state of North Carolina, which hopefully will take place in the near future. Again, I would like to thank you for joining us, Kimberly.
Yes. So much for having me be here. I hope so. Also, we can have our powwow this year. We are looking into virtual as well as in-person spaces for that. So, very excited to be here. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on tonight, Stephen. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. And so today we're talking about Black Indians North Carolina, which is an organization that you spearheaded. And so would you please give us just a little information, background information on
Yeah, so Black Indians NCs, I really had this idea for it really all the way back to 2004. It's interesting, that's back when I joined the Native American sorority, Sigma Omicron Epsilon. And I had ideals then that I wanted to do an organization or some type of programming, and I was an undergraduate then, that had to center around Afro-Indigenous people or people who are identified as a Black Indian. And I knew there were so many people in where I'm originally from, Eastern North Carolina, and people that I had met in all walks of life that had identified that way, but I didn't see organizations or education much on how to learn more history or historical presence at that time. Now, of course, the internet was starting up pretty good and we were getting very engaging on social media by 2004. So, of course, there's so many more resources now. So fast forward many years later, and we get to 2018, and I'm like, okay, I definitely need to start making presence into doing this. And I made a claim. I was like, okay, I'm going to graduate school, and within this, I am going to begin the inner workings of Black Indians NC. We had our first meetup in March 2019, and it was a really great in-person event in collaboration with the North Carolina Museum of Art and the Phoenix Tribune. And hello to Mallory Richardson if she's watching tonight, or any of her followers. She is the editor of the Phoenix Tribune in North Carolina, which focuses on Native Americans living in NC. And we really wanted to give this presence more about people who share these dual heritages. So that's when I said, okay, I'm going to put together a powwow council because that needs to be formulated. And I was able to acclaim this esteemed group of people, 8 individuals of us that are coming from all walks of life, different tribal communities, some enrolled, some are not, and just giving all these different academic as well as esteemed tribal community representations that comes full circle when it comes to this organization. And then fast forward into 2020, that was 2019. 2020, it was, we're going to prepare for a powwow to happen. And so it began the planning process and putting together those ideals. And Black Indians NC is focused on bringing educational resources as well as community service support to people who identify at historically or present day as African American and Indigenous. And so with that being said, now we are in the process of becoming a nonprofit organization very excited about that, and being able to have such esteemed people along the way that I've been able to meet, such as yourself, to do this great work with. So yes, please check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Yeah.
One of the questions I kind of had when I first heard about your organization was like, well, what what is some of like, I guess the, you know, because we kind of talked about a little bit before we started today, it was like some of the, I guess, conflict that kind of comes out of that, like out of identifying yourself as Afro-Indigenous and having even an organization that kind of segments out people of African descent within this population. Like, what are some of like the, I guess, perspectives that kind of come into play with that?
Definitely. Thank you for asking that, because we have had issues of cyberbullying and racist remarks that have been said to us on our pages by individuals who represent very well known groups. And it's truly sad to see how people truly are showing their thoughts. And a lot of times people tell me, well, it's social media, just erase it and move on and act like it never occurred. And it's like, no, I leave the comments up because I want individuals to see this is the reason this organization is so important, because this is the miseducation that is going on in our schools, miseducation going on in our homes. And as someone who's a former educator, who's now a clinical licensed social worker, it became imperative to me, even on the therapeutic side, that we must discuss these long-term traumas that have affected both communities and how dually these communities did have intersection, and that we cannot not acknowledge that this did not happen. And being someone, as you read with my bio, who is of African and Indigenous ancestry, I can't deny my African grandmother and only acknowledge one that identified as Indigenous, or vice versa. I identify and support both. They both were matriarchs in my family. They were both people that mean so much to me. I can't, be the type of person that only supports one side of my oneself. And I wanted to take a further step and do the historical work and find all the information for my own family to educate them where there has been that reclassification and miseducation there. And we see it on social media, unfortunately, for Black Indians in C. We have seen people say some truly hurtful and racial things, and it has become truly bothersome. My list is getting a little too long being blocked, everybody. So, we don't want to have to keep doing that. But all seriousness, we want to educate people. We want people to be knowledgeable, because knowledge is power. And being that there's so many esteemed academics that we invite on our conversation circles as well, who are also people who support our organization or serve as a council member, we want to make sure we're giving truth, authentic information that supports the things that we say. And we want people who are Afro-Indigenous and tribal communities to feel safe, to feel they have a voice and a stance when they are in their tribal communities or tribal councils. So it's way more deeper than just an organization to highlight just present day individuals. This is ancestor and future descendants work we're doing. So yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things, like even with ARC, one of the things that kind of precipitated, its founding was kind of this idea that, like, well, I mean, it really came from like a personal stance that I had, like, well, if I have these stories in my family, if I have like this background that's been passed down to us that we've been told, and everybody in my family kind of like, was flippant about it. Like, we didn't look at it as like, this thing where, oh, well, we have Native background. And now all of a sudden everybody felt like they were better than because of it. It was more so like, oh, that's what people said anyway, moving on. And so myself as a historian and as a educator and things like that, like, I was just always curious about like, well, why don't we look into it? Why don't we ever rediscover that past? Because I mean, I would love to know where in Africa my family came from, and I would like to know just, who we are. And in the process of just looking up, just like what's the merit behind these claims, I was coming across a lot of misinformation, and misinformation that I knew was just completely false, but it was just like it had an audience, it had steam behind it, and I'm sure you see a lot of that end of it
Oh,
too.
yes. Yes.
And so it's like, I kind of was like, well, there needs to be some sort of counterbalance to that, because in some ways, not to justify, racist comments or anything like that, but in some ways, I do understand the position when you see things like that, where it's like, well, there are people out here falsely claiming heritage that is not their own, or, using it in ways that is just wrong, or like, using it to make themselves feel special or important, or, you know, and trying to claim identities that aren't their own, um, and and not even doing the legwork to understand it, or not even doing the legwork to do the research and learn, and introduce themselves to members of various communities, and embed themselves in communities or things like that. Like, nobody's even doing that. And so I kind of get where the resentment can also come out of, when it's like, but I do think it often gets misdirected when it's directed towards African Americans specifically, you know.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's such a harsh reality. A lot of times, acceptance is difficult. And what I've noticed is, along this journey of Black Indians in C, is I've met a lot of people coming in the crossroads of their own genetic makeup and also their own ancestral research, where they find out they had enslaved family members who are from Africa, or they find out that they have African, roots when it comes to their genealogy makeup. And it has become very upsetting to many people, because their whole walk of life has been living in tribal communities, and where they've had this sense of community and culture for a long period of time of their life. And then finding out, actually, I am someone of a mixed or triracial background. It may be European, Native American, as well as African American. And then coming to the realization that there's so much untold story still left to their family history. So it's a journey, and we take understanding and safe space for that. We've had people that have emailed or messaged me personally and asked me about family genealogy. Now, we are not a genealogy service, guys, okay? I'm just gonna put it out there. But we are avid people that love researching our own personal histories and love sharing tips about how we were able to do that, and engaging with people online and posting conversation circles about ways you can research your family tree. But as for a service, no, we do not offer it as a service. But I've had people reach out, and I'm happy to say that many people were able to trace their lineage, actually connect with their tribal community that they did not know they were connected to, and enroll in those tribes, and then be a voice of an Afro-Indigenous person, an open Afro-Indigenous person, about who they are, identifying as dually who they are, and being able to serve in their tribal community. So that is what this is all about, for sure. Yeah.
And if you could, because I know you have a presentation kind of explaining some
Yeah.
of that process. I
I
was
do.
wondering if you
So,
could.
surprise, everyone. I have a little surprise for you tonight. Some of you probably have seen me posting, if you're someone that follows me, with History Before Us. And History Before Us is a great platform. They're on Facebook and Instagram. It is with Frederick Murphy. He's a documentarian and also a licensed mental health counselor. And with finding out through genealogy, he's my cousin. So I'm really excited that we connected in the past year, and we actually were serving on a panel with you, Stephen, where you invited us, and we didn't know each other then. And then we ended up finding out we were cousins. So it's funny how things come full circle from just a year ago. So literally, we got together and we started working on this amazing project. It's called Duality, an collection of Afro-Indigenous perspectives. And we had the opportunity to also work with the Cherokees for Black Indian History Preservation, who are out in Oklahoma. So that's your Western Band Cherokee of Afro-Indigenous people. And they're doing amazing works out there. And they are in partnership with us for this wonderful presentation I'm about to show you. And you guys get a sneak peek, because we're going to show it again on Friday. So if you missed it tonight, it's okay. But we are going to show it again Friday for a special screening. And I'll tell you more about that later on this evening. So yeah, I will send it on over there. So let's see here. All right, everyone, enjoy.
So to be Afro-Indigenous to me is the burden or the honor, however you look at it. I'd say I look at it as a little of both, of telling 3 stories.
I'm very proud of being Native and of being Black because I feel as though we are 2 of the most predominant creators in the world.
For the entirety of the time that my ancestors have lived in this country, my African and my Indigenous ancestors have lived in this country in contact with Western culture, it has tried to destroy them.
Walter Pleckler was like the father of eugenics. And right around the 1900s, 1920s, he was reclassifying Native Americans as colored. If the census people came and they found out you were Indian, they would take you out back and shoot you in the head.
I think that's a lot of the reason why we struggle with anti-Blackness is because we were reclassified as Black. And a lot of people in the community felt like they had to detach from being Black because they were seeking recognition from the colonial settler state.
As a Native American person and coming from a mother who looks like this, not only was I like often ostracized like by people just in the world, but it felt especially intentional when it was my own family members doing the attacking.
Our invisibility, our suffering, our generational trauma exists today.
One of the biggest contributors to the erasure of Afro-Indigenous people is that so many people are in love with this fake Hollywood idea of what an Indian has to look like. And that drives them to tell people who look different, who challenge that, to say, you're not real, you're not authentic, you don't count, etc.
To those who do not see me as Indian looking, I say, what does an Indian look like? Because we are such a multitude of colors, shapes, sizes, eye colors, hair textures. We are a variety of people.
I can't imagine what it is like to try to survive all of the traumas of war, of genocide, of slavery, of disease, of depopulation, and to still wake up the next day and decide that you are going to love your children so much that you are not going to let this be their story. And you are going to make something different. And to have to do that again and again and again, generation after generation until I am here, that is what resilience is.
All right. Wonderful.
So,
thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed.
Definitely. That was really good. And I'm looking forward to it. I mean, like, I was surprised when I first saw even the snippet. I was like, that came out of nowhere. This is great.
Right. We've been working over here.
And I definitely am probably going to have you guys, to present, on this at some point in time. But just at least preliminary, what was what was kind of like that process of even saying you wanted to put together a project like this?
Yeah, there were a lot of things to consider. Definitely first off is representation. Making sure that we had people of all walks of life that consider themselves Afro-Indigenous. And it was a display of various different tribal communities, people who are enrolled. Some people featured in the film are enrolled tribal members here in North Carolina, some are not, and have family members that are enrolled. And that also in itself is another historical trauma that has occurred with many tribal communities, is where we see certain family members are enrolled, and we've had some colorism issues. And there's a lot of historical text on that, of where there are people that were was said in the video by Crystal Cavalier, and hello to her, she's watching. Thank you so much, Crystal. About if you identified as Indian, they would take you in the back and murder you. And literally it was just the whole genocide of murdering each Indian, and people being afraid and hiding. and when it came to the census takers coming to your home, and even with people identifying you that were tribal council members, identifying you as indigenous in various communities nearby, those issues occurred. And historically, those are things people need to read more in depth about and learn about. And that's the kind of resources we want to bring to light. So that was first, representation. Got to have people there that truly have given representation. And this is a trailer, so there are many other interviews and things that we are taking on for the full-length film. But also, what the creativity piece was, showing this beautiful aspect of nature and the connectivity of grounding people to nature, and how all that aspect comes and cultivates itself into this documentary. And with people like myself and Frederick, who have researched our family trees and have discovered all these different things in our families and learning these new different stories literally almost daily from family, it was indeed a highlighted pleasure to do this, not only for our ancestors, but for our present day family, and be able to showcase this and to do it for people that follow our pages and support the things that we do. And we want people to be able to see this, especially students. We're really excited for students and youth to see things like this, for representation matters. So it was a lot to put the project together in the midst of a pandemic and socially distancing and being on CDC guidelines. It was a lot to put together, but it was wonderful, and we are still in process, and we're looking for fall 2022 to have you a full-length film and start doing screenings. Yeah,
that sounds great. Like, I'm looking forward to it. And I kind of, I remember, not to brag, but I'm also some filmmaking, I have some filmmaking background as well.
Yes,
but,
you are.
I mean, just the logistics of trying to do a film now. I don't know. I mean, like, I felt like it's difficult to film in the summertime. Like, like trying to film under these kind of conditions, and especially the communities that you're directly talking about. Like, as I stated before, like, these are adversely affected populations by the current pandemic, disproportionately speaking. And I just kind of like, what kind of, I guess, logistical issues came up with just that, like, with taking that in consideration, that, like, well, some of the people that we're talking to are part of communities that are more likely to suffer from this current virus. And, and how are we, kind of preventing that, or, like, keeping that in mind? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, it was definitely creating a schedule. So interviews were scheduled and spaced out. There was teams were wearing masks, protective measures, having, access to cleaning supplies and people being able to wash hands, or restrooms, things like that. Logistically thinking about those things. And then, of course, when it comes to the effects of this dual heritage, even with both communities, African-American or traditionally indigenous, you had to think about when people are outside, exposed to the elements of life, you want to make sure they're safe going back to their homes, for their elders or people who may have pre-existing conditions. So we had to take all those things into account. And in filmmaking process, and you being and doing a documentarian as well, that it's a process to even collect people together to be able to do these types of things, but to strategically be able to film this type of footage in literally a short amount of time. We were able to do that, and we had the pleasure of filming on the traditional Okinichi-Saponi band of lands out there. So just being able to have where, people featured in the film allowed us to film on their lands and be able to be a part of all of this, it just really brought it full circle of being able to be in support. And we're so grateful for that opportunity. And it's the connection to nature, because a lot of these communities, African-American and indigenous, have used home and natural remedies when it comes to sicknesses and pandemics and illnesses traditionally. So those discussions about those things about additional things to take in consideration, along with advisement from your physician or doctor when it comes to protecting yourself from the pandemic. So yeah, we had to take all that into account. We're putting this together, and this was filmed back in October. So yeah,
you guys deserve every accolade that's coming your way.
Thank you.
Just off of that, like I said, like, trust, I mean, like, just even filming in, like I said, the heat, that's,
yes,
for me, that was like one of the roughest things in terms of my project. It was like we were in
Yeah.
the middle of the summertime trying to film things and running around, and especially going into historic houses that didn't have central air and stuff. And it's like
Long
100+
days,
degrees, long days,
very, very long days, lots of
driving.
editing, and then just, working in partnership with wonderful partners like History Before Us,
Yeah.
and then with the Cherokees Band for Black Indian history preservation, working with groups and making sure that we're representing correctly as our own entities, but also collectively, and making sure that we're telling the story. And the beauty of Duality, the documentary, is we're not just looking at North Carolina, we're looking at all aspects of Afro-Indigenous people. So we're looking to go beyond NC. So, because we want to be able to give so many diverse perspectives. So yeah, so stay tuned, guys. We got some great things coming for you, and we'll definitely be having a screen and a talk with documentarian director Frederick Murphy on Friday. I'm going to post that flyer tomorrow, so you guys stay tuned.
And also, in reference to North Carolina and diversity, for that matter, for I guess for people, because like I guess we also are speaking from more of a position of familiarity, but for people who may not be familiar with North Carolina and I guess East Coast tribes at all, or Native American history or heritage whatsoever, I mean, is there a way to kind of I guess give like a Reader Digest of like version of that?
Yeah, let's do some cliff notes real quick of breaking it down. But there's awesome websites. So one stop you can stop at is the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs. That website is able to give you a lot of great information on what the tribal communities of North Carolina have been up to. So when you're looking at it, we have the Tuscarora, we also have the Meherrin, we have the Lumbee, we have the Eastern Band of Cherokee, we have the Halawa-Saponi, the Occaneechi Band of Saponi, the Waccamaw-Siouan, and I'm trying to make sure I don't forget anybody. I know we do still have some Saponi people who identify as Saponi, and Coharie people. So there's some wonderful indigenous tribes in North Carolina doing some incredibly great works. We are very thankful for having their support. Many have shown very much support to us, individuals as well as tribal groups. And one thing that we have been doing as a push is, in the midst of this pandemic, as Black Indians NC, is giving tribal communities and African American communities cleaning supplies donations from fundraisers we've done. We did a t-shirt fundraiser recently, and we were able to do we have another donation that'll be coming forth the later part of this month. So we're very excited to keep that going as well as a service to the community, because we realize in rural communities, there's not much access to cleaning supplies, and larger stores such as your Walmarts, your Targets, your Wegmans, your larger stores that you have more access to. In rural communities, they may be limited to more smaller businesses when it comes to that. So that's something to consider. And then more elders that may be living more remotely, they may be more spaced out and may not be living necessarily in a subdivision or in an apartment complex where you see more in the city limits. So all those things we have to take into account from a public health standpoint. And that's something that's really exciting. So yes, that's the Cliff Notes, guys. Go to the NC Commission of Indian Affairs website. You can also look at NCpedia. They also have a listing of all the websites of all those tribal communities. They all do have websites, if I'm not mistaken. They're still active, because I've looked on pretty much all of them. And they're very engaging on their social media as well. So check those tribes out on social media. And then when you get to Virginia, you got the Nazamon, the Nottoway, the Pamunkey. There's so many tribes in Virginia, and then of course coming down south, South Carolina and Georgia. There's so many, but I really highly recommend people research your Southeastern tribes. People are still here and still wanting to share that history.
And in terms of Black Indians NC, and I know that you have a number of like educators, part of your organization as well. Yeah. And so like, how does education, I mean, you mentioned earlier that education is, kind of key to, kind of creating these communities and these environments where, an organization like yours can thrive. What kind of educational initiatives, or what kind of, I guess, educational focuses are you implementing?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked. We actually have an upcoming event next week. So a little shameless plug here on the 24th. You
I
guys,
didn't even know. I didn't set that up
I
for
know
you.
you didn't know, guys. You didn't know. But a little shameless plug is next week on the 24th, we are partnering with Guilford County Schools here in North Carolina, and they have an American Indian Education Center. And so they've asked us to come and do a presentation about Afro-Indigenous people. And so they have many, many students who are in public school, K through 12, who identify as Black Indians or Afro-Indigenous. So this is a way for us to give them some more educational resources, providing some websites, and myself, Dr. Allison Matthews, and she is the executive director of the Compass Center at the Wake Forest School of Divinity in Wake Forest University. And so her and I, and also our attorney, Joshua Richardson, he is a citizen of the Halawasa tribe. They will be joining me as we talk, and they are also members of our Powwow Council. So we'll be educating our students and letting them know some very valuable information about Afro-Indigenous people in North Carolina. So yeah.
And also, you have another presentation for us.
Yes, I do. So I'll share again. I'm sharing a lot tonight, guys. Hold on. Just one sec here. And again, it is truly an honor to be here tonight. I am just so thrilled to be able to share with you guys. All right. I can share my presentation screen here and slideshow. All right. So again, everyone, hello. My name is Kimberly M. Knight. This is my presentation, Tracing My Way Home, and it's my experience personally as an Afro-Indigenous woman. And I am very thankful to be here tonight for the Dividing Line Symposium. It is a pleasure, and I am very grateful to present to you tonight. So again, my name is Kimberly Knight. I have my Master's of Social Work from North Carolina Central University. So if there are any Eagles out there, hello, fellow Eagles. I'm also a 40 under 40 honoree for North Carolina Central University as of 2020, which was great. And I'm a provisionally licensed clinical social worker, so I am a practicing therapist. And my family lineage does go for Eastern Band Cherokee, Halawasa-Poni, Tuscarora, and West African lineage. My West African lineage specifically is Ivory Coast, and that is by way of my paternal grandmother's family. So very proud. And I grew up in a very diverse family where I learned a lot of indigenous as well as African rituals, culture, history, language, information, and very, very thankful for my father and for my uncle always instilling that information in me. Even to this day, they still send me resources and things to study. So shout out to them if they're watching tonight too. Founder of Black Indians NC, and then I have a pretty extensive background in HIV and STI public health. I worked in that field for about almost 5 years, so I had a really awesome time with that. And I'm an active member of the Triangle Native American Society. It's a great organization. If you are in the Triangle or Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina, please check out our Facebook page and the website. So what does it mean, Afro-Indigenous? I know a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, these terms, Black Indians, Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Amerindian, what are these terms all meaning? And so what we want people to understand is that this is someone who identifies as both of African or Indigenous culture, lineage, or tribal community affiliation. That is a definition that we go by ourselves, that we feel collectively is true. Someone who identifies with those different roots of culture and lineage. You may hear terms such as Black Indians, Blendian, or Black Native. For me, growing up in Eastern North Carolina, Black Indian was very popular, hence why that's been the name of the group for so long. It's been a term in endearment of acknowledging both dual backgrounds from where I'm from. So specifically based on where you reside, you may hear different terms. I've heard Blendian more for out west. And then I'm also starting to see Blendian for people identify as African-American and Southeast Asian as well. So yeah. And so how did I learn about that lineage? Well, this is my dad and this is my mom. My mother has since passed away, so I'm honoring her tonight with this presentation. But my father is still with us, and so he is a great resource. He has always been very prideful about giving me information about my identity and my mother's as well. He was very avid about researching her family history as well. And these are my father's parents, my paternal grandparents. On the left, you'll see here, or to your right, rather, is my grandfather, and then you'll see my grandmother. My grandmother, her family lineage is from the Ivory Coast, for West Africa, and so I always found so many great prideful things about her. Just even I love this picture of her because it's her at a community center where she was a volunteer and she was a leader of a quilting group, but she loved to quilt and she quilted a certain style that women in her community quilted like. And then also she made this entire outfit she has on. And she was a seamstress and she was a nurse and she worked in mental health for over 30 years. And I'm very thankful for all the great works that she did. She was one of those people in your family's neighborhood that always wanted everyone to be at her table and she could provide a meal for them and be a support of them. So definitely someone who was a grand matriarch in my family. My grandfather, his family roots go all the way back deeply to Greene County, up to also in what we call in North Carolina, all the way up to western North Carolina, to Cherokee Indian Reservation. He has family roots that run that entire lineage, and I acknowledge him tonight because he is a World War II veteran. And he, rest in peace, both of them are deceased, but he was a major patriarch in the family. And then someone who was a construction worker and really well known for his brick masonry. So again, this beautiful couple here had blended. This is someone where his roots were tied here in North Carolina deeply, hers, many coming from the South, Charleston, South Carolina, Lumberton area. She had people from different parts based on how things were going during the enslavement of her people. So just looking at from the continent all the way to here, just what that meant and how much they tried to carry on tradition for me. And I greatly appreciate that. And these are my maternal grandparents over here to the left in the park. And that is my mother's parents. They lived in Nash County. They are also deceased. And I've just recently did a family tree on the grandfather on his side of the family, particularly his grandmother's side specifically. And his family lineage is Nash and Halifax County. He did have some relatives also living in Warren County, but primarily Nash and Halifax County. For those of you familiar with those areas, that's where that Halawasaponi tradition comes in and that lineage comes in for that. And then for her side of the family was Tuscarora and Lumbee. So I found a lot of people that from her parents, which you'll see here. These are my great grandparents pictured in the black and white photo. This is my grandmother's parents, and they were of Tuscarora lineage. So being able to find, and they were also African-American lineage as well. And the European lineage that I've been able to find with the research has been English. So far, I have not found any other difference. I know in our family, it has been discussions about Dutch, but actually genealogy wise and just doing research with going back all the way to 1694, only thing I've been able to find has been English based. But that's where your research comes in. So you get to learn a little bit there. So this is a photo of me, woo, throwback y'all, of me when I was 17 at a powwow. And there I am with my favorite aunt. My aunt is featured in the red shirt here. This was my mother's oldest sister. Also another amazing matriarch that was in our family. She is now passed on with our ancestors. And then featured in the middle is Miss Lynette Jeffries, a well-esteemed and well-known woman who lived in the Occaneechi-Band of Saponi areas. So she was someone very well known. We would see her at powwows. She was always so nice and so supportive of us and everything. But yes, that's me. And it didn't change too much, right? But still wearing the part in the middle sometimes, just a little. But yeah, but the main core about Afro-Indigenous people is we wanted for Black Indians NC to debunk the colorism. We wanted to educate people on genealogy and surnames in the sense of giving you information and tips and tangible items to help you with your research along the way. And then when it comes to tribal lineage or community affiliation, we wanted you to be knowledgeable about learning about your tribes. A lot of times we've seen situations where people have this idea of, okay, I'm Indigenous, great, all right, I want to go find the tribe and roll today. And then it's like, but have you even learned about the historical presence of the tribe, what that means? Because tribal communities are very intimate communities and have been very tight-knit, intimate communities for generations. So it's about, if you're tracing your way back home, be sure that you're doing it in an ethical sense where you're not trying to cause harm to others or to yourself, because genealogy can be traumatic, guys. It can be, because you're learning about so much of your family all at once, and it can be a lot to take in. And then reclassification. We talked about that a little bit in the documentary trailer, but this is where we're talking about where you're going from, might be an Indian, it may say Indian to mulatto to colored to Negro, and where do we go from here from that? And when we're looking at that, we're thinking about, well, how do I know how to distinguish? And we give tangible tips in many of our videos, but the Cliff Notes version of it is, our genealogist told me one time, who's a member of the Genealogy Society, is to look at where people were born, married, had children, and where they died. And look at the surrounding communities near them and start from there. The oral history of your family and tracing your way back and looking at the websites, or either going to the libraries when the libraries were open. Some libraries actually have online free resources where you can look through catalogs and things like that online now, or they have it digitized. So looking into the vital statistics and really researching exactly where your family lineage is starting from, because we know reclassification was something that happened, and it was erasure for Indigenous people. Choices. Do you have to choose? No, you can be exactly who you are. I've been asked to choose so much by complete strangers on the internet, asking me to just choose a side and stop saying this whole, you're both and this. No, like I said in the beginning of this presentation, but when we got started tonight, I would, and now you've seen pictures, I would not just acknowledge one or the other. I would not just acknowledge just holistically this or that. I acknowledge all the things I've learned from my family. And I understand the fear of my Indigenous family saying that they were African American only and not identifying with their Indigenous roots because of fear of things that could happen to their family. Being the words of being put on a reservation, taken by the law, murdered behind their house. All these different things. I can understand why they said it's safer for me to be Black right now than to say anything else about it. But did they leave clues? Absolutely. They left their patterns of how they quilted, how they cooked their food, where they worshiped, how they worshiped. Things like I would see my grandfather doing rain dances out in the crops in the fields that he was at. Like all these different things that I had questions about as a child, now I understand why they crocheted a certain way, or why they cooked a certain way, or sewn a certain way. So yeah, don't choose, be you. Reconnection, what does it mean to reconnect to your ancestry? It can be a process. You may get deep into your genealogy and start finding family members. I found one, but look at my success story. And that's something I'm probably gonna have to do like a whole talk about, is sharing, is the wonderful cousins that I've connected with since I started a year ago, really being open about Black Indians NC coming forward. So with that going forward, it's been beautiful. I've met probably over 60 new cousins that I have, and have had built relationships now with them, slowly talking and communicating and realizing we share same ancestry and that we share genetics as well. So I really take offense to when people say things on the line and say disrespectful things on the internet, like, oh, don't just go out here and be, focusing on what a test tube company tells you, things like that. There are many measures to measure your genealogy work. It's not just only taking a DNA test. There are things where you can violently trace back your family roots just like anyone else can. And there are historical records. And sometimes we are blessed with those historical records to tell us really deep details. And sometimes we may have had slavery family members that were enslaved, because I don't like to use the term slave. They were enslaved and against their will, and were brought here to this country unwillingly and forced to work and be labor for this country. And that is something where for them to survive and their culture to still hold on as long as it could, that should be celebrated, that they were still able to withstand and be resilient. And no, you should not acknowledge your African ancestors and only your Indigenous, or vice versa. You should acknowledge parts of you. Absolutely. So let's move forward. Let's connect as a community. All right. So here's my resources, guys. So on YouTube, you can find us at the Lux Blog NC, because that kind of houses all the kind of talks that we do. Lux Blog NC is my blog. I have 25,000 email subscribers to that blog. Hello, subscribers. Thank you so much. And they're awesome. The Lux blog is a cultural lifestyle blog that covers art, culture, style, and entertainment for North Carolina. And this is our powwow flyer, September 25th, 2021. Hold on to it tight, guys. To that date, we are looking to see what we are allowed to do with restrictions with CDC guidelines safely, if we're able to have an outdoor space for you to have a powwow, or if we're going to be virtually completely. So stay tuned. Some other resources are familysearch.org, ancestry.com. I always like to shout out nativeamericanroots.wordpress.com. That is Keonga Lucas, someone in North Carolina who has studied a lot of free people of color and indigenous people in that area. And sites.rootsweb.com. Ms. Dolores Williams, a wonderful genealogist also in North Carolina. These women have done extensive work on family members of mine prior to me even knowing that their sites existed, and I was like blown away. Black Indians memoir by Shonda Buchanan. I recommend it as a book to read. It's a great read. It was my summer read. Actually, this summer I did read it. And she's also a member of our powwow council. So I'm a little bit, persuaded to say that. And no, not really. I just really love that Shonda has done this great body of work about her family. And I had to shout her out tonight. And Africans and Native Americans, the Language of Race and the Evolution of Red and Black Peoples. Dr. Jack D. Forbes, may he rest in peace. Dr. Forbes wrote this extraordinary book on Black and intersection of Black and Native people. You must read it. If you're going to be someone who really, really is in depth, wanting to learn more about the African and Native American intersection, this is one of those ones that needs to be in your library. You need to have it in your home. And it's a very, very good book. So again, feel free to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And again, thank you all so much. All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
And and so one of the things that I thought was interesting, just the other day, I like watching the Finding Your Roots, Henry Louis Gates. And the episode that aired yesterday had Pharrell Williams on it. And he actually was tracing his lineage through his African-American ancestors that lived in North Carolina, Nash County, as a matter of fact.
That's right.
And so, one of the things, aside from the findings and, thoughts on that, I kind of appreciated the fact that in that episode they showed him kind of grappling with some of that background. And so I think I would like to know your opinion on this as well, like this idea of when you're researching these kinds of topics and coming across these things, sometimes it might be overwhelming for people, and that might be why they don't want to do it. They might not want to look up this kind of history, because it's like, well, why do you want to look up all this painful stuff? I don't care about that. I don't want to focus on that. We were more than just slaves, or I want to move beyond that history, or I want to just, even when it comes to the Native end of things too, it's like, yeah, your grandma said that, but you know what, you're Black now, so just deal with it and move on. Let's, stop trying to live a fantasy or something like that. And so I kind of want to, get your opinion on how do we encourage people to see value in that, or do we even bother doing that, and do we just focus on those who are already interested?
No, I think you made some great points, and that's a great question. I did watch the Pharrell episode. It was him and Cassie Lemons, and it was really, really good. I think the prime part about it hit home for us. Many of us on my Facebook chatted about it last night and into today, because Nash County is an area where it's a small knit community. It's a rural area in North Carolina, and my mother's family lived in Spring Hope, North Carolina, where his parents were from, his family members. And so with that being said, we understood, because my grandfather was a sharecropper. And because of that, it makes you realize in your mind, I'm the granddaughter of someone who was a sharecropper. We're not that far removed from slavery. I think that's the first thing we need to address as Black Americans, that we are not that far removed. There are people alive today who recall their parents telling them they were enslaved. at some point in their life, or they were born into slavery. There are still people alive to this day doing it. Actually, shout out to Frederick. He did a great segment where he did a documentary speaking to someone who actually experienced that and interviewed them. So I think that we really have to understand that history is not that far removed from you. And especially if you're from the South, you realize how complex it is. Hence why we can have this still cyberbullying or disrespect of racism towards Black Native people, and people think that's acceptable when you both are oppressed racists historically, when it makes no sense to be acting as if you're oppressor. So, but with Pharrell's episode, I'm glad they shown his vulnerability. I knew he was holding back, you know, when it came to the tears and that portion of it where he had to turn his head a little bit and kind of regroup mentally, because as much as we love him and he's one of my favorite artists, you know, him being a super producer, you know, he's been so far removed from that rural South. He grew up in Virginia Beach. So he didn't see what Nash County and the racism and the issues that went on. My mother, you know, she was 63 when she passed 3 years ago, but she remembers white only, colored only signs in Nash County. She remembers Black women not having access, or women in color, period, in her area not having access to birth control. So it's like these things aren't far removed, and that was just the 70s. So I really want people watching tonight to understand that you may feel we have come so far, and we have in many areas, but we still got a long way to go. And one way we cannot do it is being divisive. And I think for him, I admire his strength and resilience to come back another day to meet with Skip, to revisit the whole project of learning his family tree. And I know that they didn't get too deep into his like indigenous roots, because unfortunately, there have been many times where we've seen Skip Gates not talk publicly about people who are of indigenous ancestry in the Southeast. And this was one of those episodes where we didn't see much discussion about people who are African and indigenous in Nash County during the same time period and with similar surnames as he has in his family. And there were a lot of people online vocalizing how they have family lineages that directly are lineal descent to him. So I think with that, in order to say, do we even bother, or how do we move forward with this? It's about education, and it's about you understanding the things that you do now, the way you wear your clothes, the way you dress, the way you eat, the way you have movements or interactions. These are all things that come down the pipeline of your family traditions in some way, some form. And your family tree does matter. Doing my family research, I learned which family members suffered from whatever heart disease or cancers or diabetes or any type of hypertension. I learned about all these things to know genetically what I need to do for my restoration of life. I learned about what it was like for childbirth for many of the women in my family. So it's one of those things where it's not just learning about, oh, we're of certain parts of a culture. It's about that piece of their history stays alive within you when you acknowledge it. And you should think about it. Consider it, look into it. I'm not telling you to run out tomorrow and be like, oh, now I'm going to do all of this because it can't be done in a day because it wasn't, researched in a day. But I am saying, I hope this sparks the interest of people to learn about their family tree, ask those questions. And you're never too young to ask those questions, like, where did we come from? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I agree. It seems like one of those things where, like, we overlook the importance of those things until years down the line. Then all of a sudden, like, we're like, well, what happened to, who are we again, or where are we really from? Or someone poses a question to you and you don't know how to answer it, And I sometimes think, like, specifically with African Americans, and I'm sure also with Afro-Indigenous people as well, like this idea of our history has been, so disrupted, and so much of it, when you look at academia, when you look at these other resources and records and things like that, so much of it is not ours.
Right.
And so, the little bit that we can preserve or observe and record, we should take it upon ourselves as our responsibility to do that,
Absolutely.
And I find, and I think to some degree, when it comes to African Americans, kind of identifying with any kind of tie to Native ancestry, I think maybe that also stems from the fact that like that's our closest thing to knowing some origin,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as opposed to like a nebulous concept of, you know, of enslavement and of
Mm-hmm.
Africa. And it's just like, well, I can't really identify, because even when you're saying, well, you're African, it's just like, where, you know,
Yeah,
it's
that's
a
the
huge
starting
continent.
point too. That's exactly why I said you should want to know just as much about each,
Mm-hmm.
because I was always taught to know just as much about my West African culture as I was indigenous. It was not one over the other or anything. So that's why I took offense to people when they'll say things like, you need to choose a side. How can I choose a side when dually I've been raised and reared, rather, to acknowledge both entities of my family history? And then I do take it like, okay, there's so many resources now where we can try to slowly piece the puzzle back together to figure out where on the continent we may have come from, or if we originated here or in Asia, just looking at just what parts of the areas that we all come from, because everyone did not come from the same places. So we have to see how that migration was. Was your family in the Caribbean? Was your family in Louisiana? Was your family here through Charleston? Was your family through Norfolk? Like just seeing what identities were there. And I think that's where it takes the research and the time to look into it and know that every African person was not enslaved, and to know that there were actually indigenous slave owners. So that is something too that is a taboo topic that sometimes we don't always talk about. But it happened, and we have to acknowledge that even out of that came births of Afro-Indigenous people, just like there were births of children that were of European and African descent, or as people were calling back then, mulatto, or people who are biracial, as we say today. That is where we have to really look at how historically these things happen, and the lack of consent for where it happened, and where women were experiencing sexual violence and rape. And we have to acknowledge our ancestors went through a lot. They went through a lot. Indigenous and African women went through a lot to be here. And yes, you should acknowledge them and support their ancestry for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, not to get too esoteric, I suppose, but, you know, the idea of like, you know, the way I always pictured it anyway was, you know, when I'm looking up my family history, you know, someone back then, you know, thought it was necessary for themselves to survive, like to
Mm-hmm.
survive in that, in the hope that, you know, down the line something will get better for
Mm-hmm.
their future generations, if not for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so just in their acts of survival
Mm-hmm.
and their acts of tenacity, they were thinking about me.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only thing I could do that would be right would be to think about them and try to find out who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of pay, and almost like pay it forward in that sense. Like they were thinking about me, I should think about them.
That's
And
right.
so, yeah, and I just think that's one of those things that, at least that's what I bring when I my justification for researching any family history
Mm-hmm.
is that.
Yeah, it was an honor to research my great great grandmother's history, to know what her family went through and just how their lineage expanded all the way back to the late 1600s. And it definitely took a lot of time out of my life. Of course, it takes time to do genealogy, but to hear the stories and the oral history along the way to confirm, because you'll have family nicknames and you're like, well, I found the birth name. Is this also the nickname of this person? And like, people verify, and then comes a story, and then comes information. And then if you're a younger person who may be like, oh, this is just too much, I have other things I'm trying to do, trust me, you will enjoy it just the same. It is one of those things where learning can be very fun and educational, and no matter what age you start, even if it starts with just asking about your grandparents and what they did. And I think about, just generations before me, all the wonderful things they did in order for me to have the opportunity to have a master's degree, to be a member of a sorority, to be able to do the things that I do now. I have to pay homage to them whenever I do this great work of Black Indians NC, because of them, I'm able to do these things, because there were women that were not able to do these things literally just 20, 30 years ago. There was struggle for women of color to do these things, Black women specifically. And there's still struggle in certain communities for Black and Indigenous women to be open about it, And men too, to be open about who they are and authentically who they are. And we have to stop shaming our people. We have to acknowledge each other, and we have to support each other in our walk, in our journey of genealogy. So, yeah.
Now, we do have some questions
All right, come
that
on,
came in.
questions.
So one was, what tips do you have for people who are researching their ancestry and they hit roadblocks, especially if the records are in other states?
Gotcha. So if your records are in other states and you're hitting a few roadblocks, I definitely say look out for your not North Carolina, I'm sorry. I'm so NC so much. Look at your state's genealogy society. A lot of times they have a Facebook group, an Instagram group, or they may have a website. I know I found many genealogists on the North Carolina Genealogy Society website, and they were able to give me some tips on how to find some historical records. Some things have not been digitized yet, so they're actually still in the courthouses or libraries. So depending upon how far back you're going, I give that tip of checking out your genealogy society in your state, and also Googling genealogists that are at the public libraries in your state. I know here in North Carolina, there are genealogists who are employed at the library, and they're there to help assist you with your genealogy work. So that may also be true in your state. So definitely check out your public library genealogy society.
And I would also recommend too, like the historical societies of whatever counties you're looking up.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of mine, like when I remember finding yearbook photos of my grandfather when he was a child. And, and the only way I was able to find that was I contacted a couple of historical societies. And then all of a sudden it came down to just one guy who collected yearbooks. And they just happened to know him. And he collected these yearbooks from a school that's now closed. And he had them from like the 1940s, 1930s and 40s all the way up. And he just brought a stack. I just arranged a meeting, and he had a stack of yearbooks. And I just had to go through them. And I found pictures of my grandfather and all his siblings. And it was just through those kind of contacts, you'll be surprised what kind of stuff is out there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was just this one guy named Buck.
All right. And that was my grandfather's nickname, my dad's father.
Yeah, how
That's
about
awesome.
That? Yeah, it just, you never know how stuff pans out. And who keeps what? Random people collect random things,
Yeah, that reminds me of that website, Find a Grave, of whomever you are that runs that website and goes out to cemeteries and takes those pictures. Thank you, because of you, we're able to find so many different cemetery sites. So definitely.
And also we have a comment, and a question.
All right.
It's, how do we work to decolonize Indian country, or do we just continue to do our own work?
Yeah, it starts with yourself, and it starts with your peers. I have many peers who are Indigenous and are enrolled in tribal communities. But one way with Black Indians NC is I've been educating them a lot about what Afro-Indigenous life has been like for myself personally, like from a personal perspective, like how it was learning language and how it was learning culture and learning about, regalias and ribbon skirts and learning about bead work and doing all these things as a child, and how growing up as an adult and attending powwows from childhood all the way up to adulthood, and opening myself up a little bit to let them know my experiences. And then they were like, oh, that's the same thing I was doing. Or they realize how similar it is. And so it becomes where you're seeing now more people who are enrolled in tribal communities are vocalizing whether they're standing as an ally or supporter to us, or there's someone who is, acknowledging now openly that they are indeed a Black Indian as well. And so I admire it. I love it and I appreciate it. So start with yourself, and having those conversations is not tough. It's not easy. It's very tough to have those conversations sometimes. But another way too is social media. Like I post positive images of Afro-Indigenous people all the time. I post things that are relative, like talks like this. I've done conversation circles. So there's many ways we can get out in the community, and educating yourself first step. Yeah.
Okay. And before we wrap for the evening, if you could just remind everybody about some of the upcoming events Black Indians NC has.
Oh yeah. So this Friday, we will be doing a screening on Black Indians NC Facebook page. It's going to be at 6:30 p.m. if I'm not mistaken. I don't have the flyer right in front of me right now, but I will be posting it tomorrow morning for you guys for Black Indians NC. We will be having a candid conversation with documentarian Frederick Murphy. And we're also going to be joined by some special guests from over at the organization, the Cherokees for Black Indian Preservation. So very excited about that. And we'll be showing the piece that you saw tonight. You got a sneak peek early. So we'll be showing it again and having discussion about the documentary. So that's going to be great. And then next week on the 24th, which is a Wednesday at 7 p.m., we are collaborating with Guilford County Schools American Indian Education Center. Very excited. Shout out to Stephen Bell over there. We're going to be working with them to talk about Afro-Indigenous people and kind of do some information and things like that, some talks. I'll be joined by Dr. Allison Matthews and attorney Joshua Richardson. So those are some things that are coming up. And we're also looking to have a conversation circle, a traditional one like most of our viewers are used to. I'm trying to see about the schedules, but we're trying to incorporate this time for next Tuesday. It will be the 23rd, where we're discussing ribbon skirts, beadwork, as well as food. So giving a little culture piece there from some Afro-Indigenous women. So yeah, stay tuned. We got a lot going on. Follow us so then you won't miss it.
Thank you. And then, yeah, so again, I'd like to thank you, Kimberly Knight, for joining us. Just a quick announcement. In addition to these past two events that we've had for the Dividing Line Symposium, we also will have Rachel Finch from the Williamson County of Tennessee Heritage Foundation discussing the historic Franklin Masonic Hall, which was a 19th century building, which is also the site of the Chickasaw removal.
Yep, the Indian
treaty being signed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and also it was a Civil War site as well. And so the U.S. colored troops were housed there, and it was also served as a Civil War hospital. So she's going to be talking about some of the preservation efforts for that site and some of the initiatives that they have going forward in terms of documenting and presenting that site's history. That will be this Friday at 3 p.m. And you can watch it on Facebook or www.arccenter.org. And on Saturday, we will be wrapping up with our 7:30 panel dealing with coping and movement. And we'll be joined by Cedric Turner-Copa, Ava Macias, and Angel Hawk. And so we'll be discussing some of the ways that people can cope with various stressors, mental issues, and also how do we cope with some of our past traumas, generational traumas, and how do we deal with those as both African Americans and those who have Indigenous background as well? What are some of these things, how they compact together to kind of exhibit themselves? And so that will be Saturday, 7:30 at www.arccenter.org or facebook.com/arccenter. And again, thank you, Kimberly Knight, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And we hope to see you guys back later this week. Thank you for supporting our symposium this year. Again, we're very much different than how we normally have done it. So it's very nice to at least have some level of an audience and kind of keep this thing going. And hopefully in the years to come, we'll get back to some other kind of formats or multiple formats. Thank you again. If you wish to support ARC, you can just visit our website, donate. We could use all the help we can possibly get. Black Indians NC, I'm sure they could use all the help they could possibly get as well. So please donate and support. Right? So thank you very much and have a good night, everyone.